The morning air was cool and quiet as the yellow school bus turned the corner, stopping near the same small house it did every weekday. The bus driver, Mrs. Collins, had been driving this route for years, long enough to know every parent, every child, and every little routine that happened at each stop. She'd seen kids grow up, change schools, and even come back to visit her after they'd graduated. It was a comforting routine, one that gave her days a steady rhythm. But lately, something about one of the children had started to worry her. A girl named Lily had been acting differently. She was about 9 years old with light brown hair that usually bounced as she ran toward the bus, backpack swinging behind her. She was a bright kid, polite, curious, and always ready with a smile. But for the past week or two, that smile had disappeared. Every morning, Lily's dad walked her to the bus stop. He looked like any other tired parent, holding a travel mug of coffee, checking his phone, sometimes giving her a quick pat on the shoulder. Nothing about him stood out. But Mrs. Collins began to notice how Lily's body language changed when he was there. She used to hug him goodbye. Now she kept a few steps away, her backpack clutched tight to her chest, eyes down, as if she couldn't wait to leave. That morning, Mrs. Collins opened the bus door and called out cheerfully, "Good morning, Lily," hoping to see that spark of energy she'd missed. Lily looked up and tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Morning," she said softly, barely loud enough to hear. Her father gave a small wave. "See you later," before turning back toward the house. Lily didn't wave back. She walked quickly to her usual seat, second row, window side, and stared out the window as the bus pulled away. Mrs. Collins kept her eyes on the road, but she couldn't help glancing at the mirror from time to time. Lily sat still, her hands folded on her lap. Every few seconds, she reached down to adjust her backpack as though checking something inside. Mrs. Collins thought that was odd. Usually, kids tossed their bags on the seat and forgot about them until they got to school. At the next stop, another group of children climbed aboard, laughing and chattering. They filled the bus with the usual morning noise, talk about homework, jokes, and what was for lunch. But Lily didn't join in. She just stared out the window, lost in thought. Mrs. Collins remembered when she first started driving the bus years ago. She'd learned that kids sometimes go through quiet phases, a bad grade, an argument with a friend, a sick pet. Usually it passed in a few days, but something about Lily's silence felt heavier than that. When the bus reached school, Lily was the last one to get up. She slipped her backpack over her shoulders and walked down the aisle slowly. As she passed Mrs. Collins, she said, "Thank you," the way she always did, but her voice trembled slightly. Mrs. Collins gave her a gentle smile. "Have a good day, sweetheart." Lily nodded and hurried off the bus, disappearing into the crowd of students. The rest of the morning went on as usual. Mrs. Collins cleaned the bus, grabbed a cup of coffee, and sat for a few minutes before her next route. But she couldn't shake the image of Lily's nervous face. That afternoon, when she picked up the kids for the ride home, Lily seemed even quieter. She sat by herself again, staring down at her lap. At one point, one of the older boys accidentally bumped her seat while walking by. Lily flinched so hard that he stopped and apologized right away. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you." "It's okay," Lily whispered, pulling her backpack closer. Mrs. Collins watched from the mirror. Something about that backpack kept bothering her. It wasn't particularly big or heavy, but Lily treated it like it was precious, or secret. She never let it leave her sight. When they reached her stop, Mrs. Collins noticed Lily hesitating before stepping off. Her dad was waiting at the end of the driveway, phone in one hand, keys in the other. Lily looked at him for a moment, then slowly made her way down the steps. She didn't run into his arms like she used to. Instead, she kept her distance. "See you tomorrow," Mrs. Collins called after her, trying to keep things light. Lily turned back just long enough to give a small wave before following her dad inside. That night, Mrs. Collins couldn't stop thinking about it. She tried to tell herself she was overthinking things. Kids change, families go through rough patches. It didn't always mean something was wrong. Still, she couldn't ignore the feeling in her gut that told her Lily wasn't just having a bad week. The next morning, the same thing happened again. Lily came out the front door with her backpack already on, her dad walking behind her. She didn't say a word. When they reached the curb, her dad crouched down to tie her shoe. Mrs. Collins noticed, Lily stepping slightly back as though uncomfortable with him being that close. It was a tiny movement, but it caught her eye immediately. When Lily climbed onto the bus, she gave the driver a quick glance, almost as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. Then she sat down, hugging her backpack tightly. Mrs. Collins drove off, her mind racing. She'd seen hundreds of kids over the years, but she couldn't remember the last time she'd seen one look so scared, for no obvious reason. During the ride, she tried to distract herself by chatting with some of the kids in the front seats, but every time she looked in the mirror, her eyes landed on Lily. The girl didn't talk to anyone, didn't open her bag, and didn't even look out the window this time. It was as if she was completely lost in thought or worry. At school, Mrs. Collins thought about saying something to one of the teachers. But what would she say? A kid seems sad? It wasn't exactly a reportable concern. Still, she made a mental note to pay closer attention over the next few days. By midweek, the change in Lily was impossible to ignore. Even other kids started whispering about it. One morning, as they waited in line to get off the bus, another girl asked, "Lily, are you okay? You've been super quiet lately." Lily forced a small smile. "I'm fine," but her voice cracked. When she stepped off the bus, Mrs. Collins saw her looking back at her house just for a second. The expression on her face wasn't the usual sleepy look of a kid heading to school. It was something else. Fear, maybe, or confusion. It was the kind of look that made Mrs. Collins's stomach twist. That afternoon, things got stranger. Lily climbed onto the bus carrying her backpack like usual, but when she sat down, she unzipped it slightly and looked inside, whispering something to herself. Then she zipped it shut and placed both hands on top of it. Mrs. Collins glanced in the mirror again, trying not to be obvious. Was Lily hiding something? Kids sometimes smuggled toys, snacks, or even tiny pets to school, but there was something different about this. Lily wasn't smiling or giggling. She was anxious. The bus ride home felt longer than usual. When they reached Lily's stop, she hesitated before standing up. She took a deep breath, like she was bracing herself for something. Mrs. Collins had seen that kind of body language before, from adults about to have a tough conversation, not from a child about to go home. "Everything okay, Lily?" she asked softly. Lily froze for a second, then nodded quickly. "Yeah, I'm fine." She hurried off the bus, gripping her backpack as tightly as ever. That night, Mrs. Collins sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring out the window. Her husband, who had retired a few years back, noticed her silence. "Rough day?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "It's that little girl on my route, Lily. Something's not right with her. I can just tell." He smiled kindly. "You always worry about your kids. Maybe she's just shy." "Maybe," Mrs. Collins said. But her gut told her otherwise. She'd seen enough kids to recognize when something wasn't just shyness. The next morning was colder. Frost covered the grass, and everyone wore thicker jackets. As the bus pulled up, Mrs. Collins saw Lily standing at the curb again. Her dad stood a few steps behind her, holding his phone. Lily was gripping her backpack strap so tightly her knuckles were white. When the bus door opened, Lily didn't even look at her father. She climbed aboard quickly and sat down. Her dad said something. Mrs. Collins couldn't hear what, but Lily didn't reply. She just stared straight ahead. As the bus rolled away, Mrs. Collins caught one last glimpse of the man through the mirror. He was watching the bus with a strange look, not a smile, not even a wave. Just standing there, staring. Mrs. Collins tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. She told herself she was imagining things. Still, her heart felt heavy. Throughout the morning ride, Lily kept checking her backpack again. She'd unzip it, peek inside, and close it quickly. Each time she did, she looked even more nervous. By the time they reached school, Mrs. Collins had made up her mind. If Lily didn't seem better soon, she would talk to someone about it. Maybe a teacher, maybe the counselor. Because sometimes what looked like just quiet was actually a child trying to hold in something too big to say out loud. She didn't know it yet, but in just a few days, that small decision, to pay attention, would change everything. The next few days passed slowly, and every morning seemed to repeat itself, only with small details that made Mrs. Collins more uneasy. She tried not to jump to conclusions, but it was becoming impossible to ignore how different Lily had become. Once upon a time, she'd been one of those bright kids who would wave through the bus window and chat about her favorite cartoons or what she wanted for lunch. Now she sat so still that sometimes Mrs. Collins had to check the mirror just to make sure she was okay. The change wasn't just shyness or a bad mood anymore. It was something deeper. That Tuesday morning, the sky was gray and heavy, the kind of day that made everyone a little quieter. As the bus turned the corner, Mrs. Collins saw Lily waiting by the curb again, holding her backpack tightly. Her dad was standing behind her as usual, but this time he was talking fast, using his hands a lot. Lily just nodded without saying anything. When the bus stopped, Lily didn't wait for him to finish. She climbed up the steps quickly, almost tripping over the last one. Mrs. Collins caught her eye for a moment and smiled softly. "Careful there, sweetheart." "Sorry," Lily whispered, catching her breath. She took her usual seat, second row by the window. As the bus started moving, Mrs. Collins couldn't help glancing in the side mirror again. Lily's dad was still standing on the curb, watching until the bus disappeared around the corner. That image stayed in her mind longer than she expected. During the ride, the bus was filled with the normal sounds of kids: laughter, sneakers squeaking, backpacks thumping against seats. But Lily was quiet. Every now and then she would touch the zipper of her bag and make sure it was closed, as if protecting something inside. At one point, a boy sitting behind her leaned forward and asked, "Hey, what's in there? You keep checking it." Lily froze for a second and turned halfway around. "It's just school stuff," she said quickly, pulling the backpack closer. The boy shrugged and went back to talking to his friend, but Mrs. Collins caught that small flash of worry on Lily's face. By the time they reached school, Mrs. Collins decided she needed to do something. She couldn't just watch anymore, so later that morning, when the buses were parked, she walked into the main office. The school secretary looked up from her computer. "Morning, Mrs. Collins, everything okay?" "Yeah," Mrs. Collins said, hesitating. "Well, mostly. There's a student on my route, Lily. She's been acting a little off lately. Quiet, nervous, that kind of thing. I'm not saying anything's wrong, but I just thought maybe her teacher should keep an eye on her." The secretary nodded. "That's good to know. I'll mention it to her homeroom teacher." Mrs. Collins felt relieved, even if it was a small step. She went back to her bus and told herself she'd done the right thing. Maybe Lily just needed someone else to notice too. That afternoon, though, things didn't go as expected. When Lily climbed onto the bus after school, she looked more upset than usual. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying. Mrs. Collins wanted to ask if she was okay, but with other kids around, she didn't want to embarrass her. Lily sat in her usual spot, opened her backpack slightly, then closed it again fast. She didn't talk to anyone, didn't smile. Even when her friends tried to get her attention, she just nodded without looking up. The bus rolled down the long road toward her neighborhood, and Mrs. Collins kept watching her through the mirror. Something about the way Lily kept checking her bag was making her heart race a little. She tried to convince herself that it was just a project, or maybe something she didn't want to break, but deep down she knew there was more to it. Finally, as the bus neared Lily's stop, Mrs. Collins decided she couldn't ignore it anymore. She pulled over a little before the driveway and said softly, "Hey Lily, can you hang on for a second before getting off?" Lily looked startled. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, not at all," Mrs. Collins said with a gentle smile. "I just wanted to ask if you're doing okay. You've been really quiet lately. I just want to make sure everything's all right." For a moment, Lily didn't answer. She looked down at her backpack, then out the window. "I'm fine," she said quietly. "Just tired." Mrs. Collins nodded, trying not to push. "All right, sweetheart. If you ever need to talk about something, you know you can tell your teacher, okay?" Lily gave a small nod, then hurried off the bus. That night, Mrs. Collins couldn't stop thinking about her. She replayed that look on the girl's face over and over. The kind of look you get when you want to say something but don't think you're allowed to. The next morning, things only grew stranger. When Lily got on the bus, she looked exhausted. Her hair wasn't brushed, her jacket was buttoned unevenly, and she kept her backpack on her lap the whole time. When the bus hit a small bump, she grabbed it so quickly that it startled the kids around her. "What's in that bag?" one of the boys teased. "A treasure?" Lily didn't even smile. "It's just stuff," she murmured, turning toward the window. Mrs. Collins felt a knot forming in her chest. She could tell the other kids were starting to notice, too. A few of them whispered, wondering what was going on with her. When they reached school, Lily walked off the bus slowly, almost dragging her feet. She looked back once like she wanted to say something, then shook her head and kept walking. That afternoon, Mrs. Collins decided to park the bus a little early outside the school, hoping to have a word with Lily's teacher. As she waited near the front office, she saw Lily walking down the hall with her backpack held tight against her chest. "Hi there, Lily," Mrs. Collins said gently. "How was your day?" Lily jumped a little, surprised to see her. "It was fine," she said softly. Mrs. Collins smiled. "Good to hear. You've been quiet lately, that's all. Just checking in." Lily hesitated, glancing around like she didn't want anyone to hear. "I just have to bring something for my dad." "That's all," she whispered. Mrs. Collins frowned slightly. "Something for your dad?" Lily nodded. "He told me to keep it safe." Before Mrs. Collins could ask what she meant, Lily's teacher called her from down the hall, and she ran off toward her classroom. Mrs. Collins stood there feeling uneasy. Something about the words "keep it safe" stuck in her mind all the way home. The next day, the bus ride started out normally, but halfway through, Mrs. Collins heard a strange sound, about a soft metallic click. It was quick, so faint she thought she imagined it, but when she looked in the mirror, she saw Lily reaching into her backpack again, adjusting something inside. "Everything all right back there?" Mrs. Collins asked, trying to sound casual. Lily looked up fast. "Yeah, sorry." The bus driver smiled and went back to watching the road, but her heart was racing now. She couldn't shake the feeling that something inside that bag wasn't supposed to be there. When they arrived at school, Mrs. Collins watched carefully as Lily got off the bus. The girl carried the backpack carefully, holding it in front of her as if afraid to drop it. Mrs. Collins noticed a faint mark near the zipper, like tape residue, or maybe glue. She made a mental note of it. By that afternoon, Mrs. Collins had made a decision. She didn't want to invade Lily's privacy, but if something on her bus could be unsafe even by accident, she had a responsibility to check. As the kids climbed on for the ride home, Mrs. Collins smiled and greeted each one. When Lily came up the steps, she hesitated for a second, then gave a small nod and sat down. The bus started moving, the noise of chatter filling the air again. About 10 minutes later, Mrs. Collins saw Lily bend down and open her bag slightly. The movement was small, but her face looked tense. She glanced around to see if anyone was watching, then closed it again quickly. By the time they reached her neighborhood, Mrs. Collins was almost certain something wasn't right. But she told herself she'd wait one more day. She didn't want to accuse anyone of anything without reason. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table again, the same spot she always used to think things through. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Her husband noticed her distant look. "You're thinking about that little girl again, aren't you?" She nodded slowly. "Something's not right. I don't know what it is, but that backpack, she treats it like it's a secret. I just can't shake the feeling," he sighed. "You've got a good heart. Just be careful, okay? Sometimes it's not our job to fix everything." Mrs. Collins smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But sometimes noticing can make a difference." The next morning, she woke up with a strange heaviness in her chest. She didn't know why, but she had a bad feeling, one that she couldn't explain. She poured her coffee, put on her jacket, and headed out to the bus yard. As she started the engine, she looked at her reflection in the mirror and whispered to herself, "Today, I'm going to find out what's really going on." She didn't know it yet, but that decision would lead her to a discovery that would make her heart pound faster than it ever had in all her years of driving. The next morning felt different the moment Mrs. Collins woke up. She couldn't explain why, but there was a heaviness in the air, something that made her uneasy before she even left her house. The sky was dark and cloudy, the kind that promised rain later. As she poured her coffee, her hands felt shaky. It wasn't like her to feel nervous before work, but that morning she just couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. When she reached the bus yard, everything looked normal. The rows of yellow buses lined up in neat order, engines humming, drivers chatting as they prepared for their routes. But Mrs. Collins wasn't in the mood for small talk. She climbed into her seat, checked the mirrors, and started the engine. As the bus rumbled to life, she took a deep breath and whispered quietly, "Please let today go smoothly." When she pulled up to Lily's stop, the scene was the same as always, or at least it looked that way at first. Lily stood near the curb, clutching her backpack tightly. Her dad was standing behind her, arms crossed, saying something that Mrs. Collins couldn't hear through the glass. Whatever it was, Lily wasn't answering. She just nodded slightly, her eyes fixed on the ground. As soon as the bus stopped, Lily rushed up the steps. "Good morning," Mrs. Collins said with her usual smile, hoping to lighten the mood. "Morning," Lily replied softly. Her voice was barely above a whisper. She sat in her usual spot, second row by the window, holding her backpack in her lap. Mrs. Collins's eyes flickered to the mirror as she pulled away. Something about that bag seemed even more off today. The way Lily held it, like it was something fragile or important, made her heart beat a little faster. The ride was quiet at first. The chatter of the other children faded into the background. Every so often, Mrs. Collins looked up and caught Lily glancing down at her backpack, her fingers tracing the zipper nervously. About halfway through the route, the bus hit a small bump and a faint sound came from Lily's bag. A tiny metallic rattle. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make Mrs. Collins freeze for a second. She looked in the mirror again, but Lily didn't seem surprised. She just pulled the backpack closer to her chest as if protecting it. Mrs. Collins's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Her thoughts started racing. Was it just a toy? A music box? Or something else? She didn't want to overreact, but she also couldn't ignore the growing fear building inside her. When they reached the school, Lily stood up slowly. Before she got off the bus, Mrs. Collins said gently, "Hey, sweetheart, is everything okay today?" Lily hesitated. For a moment, it looked like she was about to say something. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Then she shook her head quickly and said, "I'm fine," before hurrying down the steps. Mrs. Collins watched her walk toward the school doors, backpack clutched tightly against her. She stayed parked for a few extra seconds, trying to calm her nerves. Something wasn't right. Later that morning, she couldn't focus on anything else. Even as she cleaned the bus and filled out her route sheet, her mind kept returning to that sound, the faint rattle, and the way Lily had looked so tense. By the time school let out that afternoon, Mrs. Collins had made a quiet decision. She told herself she wasn't going to invade anyone's privacy, but if she had even the smallest chance to make sure everything was okay, she'd take it. When the final bell rang and the children began to pour out of the building, Mrs. Collins sat straighter in her seat, watching closely. One by one, the kids climbed onto the bus, chatting about their day. Then she saw Lily walking slowly across the parking lot, her backpack hugged tightly to her chest again. "Hey there, Mrs. Collins said softly as Lily stepped on board. "Hi," Lily murmured, avoiding eye contact. She sat down quickly in her usual seat. As the bus rolled out of the school parking lot, Mrs. Collins glanced at her through the mirror. The same routine played out. Lily kept her hands on her backpack, her eyes down, and her expression worried. A few minutes later, the bus turned down a quiet road surrounded by tall trees. The chatter from the other kids faded as they got off at their stops, one by one. By the time they reached the last few stops, the bus was quiet. Only Lily and two other kids were left. That's when Mrs. Collins noticed it again, another small sound coming from Lily's bag. This time it was followed by a faint beeping noise, almost like a timer. It was so soft she thought maybe she imagined it, but when she looked in the mirror, Lily's face was pale. "Everything all right, sweetheart?" Mrs. Collins asked, trying to sound calm even though her pulse had started to race. Lily looked up suddenly, eyes wide. I think I need to get home," she stammered. Mrs. Collins forced a smile. "We'll be there soon." Her mind was spinning now. What was in that backpack? She knew it couldn't be anything dangerous. Lily was a quiet, gentle girl, But still, the fear wouldn't go away. She had driven this bus for 20 years and had been through safety drills countless times. Every one of them had taught her the same thing. If something feels wrong, take it seriously. When the last two kids got off, only Lily remained. Her stop was coming up next. Mrs. Collins took a deep breath and made a decision. She gently pulled the bus over to the side of the road away from traffic. "Hey, Lily," she said softly, turning around a little in her seat. "Can I ask you something?" Lily's hands gripped her backpack tighter. "What is it?" "I've noticed you've been carrying that bag really carefully," Mrs. Collins said in a calm voice. "And I heard something inside earlier. I just want to make sure everything's okay. You're not in any trouble, I promise. I just want to make sure you're safe." For a moment, Lily didn't move. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. "I can't show you," she whispered. "Why not?" Mrs. Collins asked gently. "Because he said not to," Lily said, her voice trembling. Mrs. Collins felt her heart sink. "Who said that?" she asked softly, but Lily didn't answer. Mrs. Collins hesitated for a moment, then decided she couldn't wait any longer. She reached into her bag for her phone, ready to call the school for help, when Lily suddenly said, "Wait." Slowly, she unzipped her backpack halfway and pulled it open just enough for Mrs. Collins to see inside. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. Inside was a small metal box wrapped in layers of tape and wires. It wasn't large, but it looked complicated, too complicated for a child to have made. Next to it were a few folded papers and a tiny note written in messy handwriting. Mrs. Collins' eyes widened, her heart pounding. She didn't know exactly what it was, but it didn't look safe. Her first thought was that it could be something from a toy or a science project, but her instincts screamed otherwise. "Sweetheart," she said softly, trying to keep her voice calm. "Where did you get this?" Lily looked terrified now. "He told me to bring it. He said it was just something for work. He told me not to open it." Mrs. Collins nodded slowly, her mind racing. She didn't want to scare her, but she also couldn't ignore what she'd just seen. "Okay," she said gently. "We're not going to touch it anymore, all right? You did nothing wrong, Lily. I just want you to sit very still for me, okay?" Lily nodded, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Collins took a deep breath, trying to keep her hands from shaking. She pulled the bus safely onto a side road and quietly turned off the engine. Her training kicked in. Stay calm, keep everyone safe, call for help. She reached for her radio and called the school office. "This is Bus 47. I have a situation. I need assistance immediately." The voice on the other end sounded alert. "What kind of situation?" Mrs. Collins hesitated. She didn't want to say too much with Lily listening. "Just send someone, please. It involves one of the students and a suspicious item." Within minutes, the school security team and a police officer on patrol nearby were on their way. Mrs. Collins kept her voice calm as she talked to Lily, telling her that everything was going to be okay. When the officer arrived, Mrs. Collins carefully explained what had happened. The officer spoke to Lily gently, asking her a few questions. Lily told them that her dad had given her the metal box that morning and said to take it to school but not to show anyone. He told her it was important. The officer examined the box cautiously and then radioed for additional support, just to be safe. The bus was evacuated and secured. Mrs. Collins stood nearby, her heart still pounding but grateful that she had trusted her instincts. As the officers worked, one of them turned to her and said quietly, "You did the right thing. This could have been much worse if you hadn't noticed." Mrs. Collins nodded, still in shock. "I just couldn't ignore that feeling. She was so scared." Lily sat on the grass nearby with a blanket around her shoulders, talking softly to another officer. Mrs. Collins walked over and knelt beside her. "You're very brave," she said softly. "You did the right thing telling me." Lily wiped her eyes. "Am I in trouble?" "Not at all," Mrs. Collins said, smiling gently. "You did exactly what you were supposed to do." The little girl nodded, her hands still trembling slightly. As the sun began to set and the flashing lights faded in the distance, Mrs. Collins sat on the bus steps, staring out at the quiet road. She couldn't stop thinking about how close things had come to going differently. She didn't know all the answers yet, what the box was or why Lily's dad had told her to bring it. But one thing was certain. She had listened to her instincts, and that had made all the difference. The sound of sirens faded as the police cars pulled away, leaving the quiet hum of the engine from the empty bus. Mrs. Collins sat on the first seat, still trying to steady her breathing. The afternoon sun was setting low behind the trees, painting the road in a pale orange glow. Everything that had happened in the last hour felt unreal, like a scene from a movie she never asked to be part of. She glanced outside the bus window and saw Lily sitting on the grass with one of the officers. The little girl looked so small, her backpack resting a few feet away from her, now sealed inside a clear evidence bag. Mrs. Collins's heart ached. All she could think was how scared Lily must have been, carrying that thing to school every day without understanding what it really was. A soft knock on the bus door made her turn. One of the officers stepped inside. He was calm but looked serious. "Mrs. Collins, thank you for staying. We're going to take the student to a safe location for a while. We've already contacted Child Services and the school principal. They'll need to talk with you later to get a full statement." Mrs. Collins nodded, still feeling the tension in her chest. Was it dangerous?" she asked carefully. The officer gave a small sigh. "We're not completely sure yet, but it doesn't seem like it was active. We're treating it carefully, though. Better safe than sorry." She nodded again. "I just can't believe it. She's only a child." The officer softened his tone. "You did the right thing. You noticed something that others might have ignored." After a few more questions, the officers packed up their gear and left. Mrs. Collins sat quietly on the bus for a long moment, her hands folded in her lap. The bus was empty now, just her and the faint smell of diesel and school lunches. She leaned back in her seat, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. When she finally drove the bus back to the yard, the world outside looked almost normal again. Cars moving, people walking dogs, kids riding bikes. But she couldn't shake the image of Lily's frightened eyes. That evening, when she got home, her husband was already in the kitchen making tea. The moment he saw her face, he knew something was wrong. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said gently. She sank into the chair and rubbed her forehead. "It was Lily," she said quietly. "There was something in her backpack, something that could have hurt people. She said her dad told her to bring it." Her husband froze for a second. "What, are you serious?" Mrs. Collins nodded, her voice trembling. "The police came. They said it wasn't live, but it looked real. She thought it was just something for him, something she had to protect. She was terrified." He set down the teapot slowly. "That poor girl," he whispered. "And thank goodness you caught it." Mrs. Collins looked down at her hands. "I just keep thinking, what if I hadn't said anything? What if I'd ignored the signs? I can't stop picturing her sitting there every morning, holding that bag like her life depended on it." Her husband reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You saved her, and maybe a lot of other people too. You should be proud of that," but Mrs. Collins didn't feel proud. She felt heavy, sad. She had seen many things driving that bus over the years. Children growing up, families changing, neighborhoods shifting. But she had never seen a child so afraid of home. The next morning, she was called into the school for a meeting. When she arrived, the principal, a counselor, and a child protection officer were waiting in the office. They all looked serious but kind. "Mrs. Collins," the principal began softly, "we want to thank you for your quick thinking yesterday. It's clear your instincts may have prevented something very serious." Mrs. Collins nodded. "I just couldn't ignore how scared she looked." The counselor, a gentle woman with a calm voice, leaned forward. "Lily is safe now. She spent the night with a social worker, and they've spoken to her. She told them her father has been under a lot of stress lately. He's been saying strange things, getting angry easily. He told her to bring that device because he thought it would keep him safe." She didn't understand what he meant. Mrs. Collins felt a chill run through her. So she really didn't know what it was? The counselor shook her head. No, she thought it was a science project he was working on. She said he made her promise not to tell anyone about it. The child protection officer added, "Her father is being questioned now. We don't know the full story yet, but it seems like he might have been struggling with his mental health. For now, Lily is staying with her aunt until things get sorted out. Mrs. Collins let out a shaky breath. I'm just glad she's safe, the principal nodded. You did more than you realize. A lot of people overlook small changes in kids. You noticed and you cared enough to act. After the meeting, Mrs. Collins walked out to her bus and sat in the driver's seat for a while. The seat felt familiar, comforting, but the morning light coming through the windshield looked different now. Every little noise reminded her of that moment. The faint rattle, the zipper, the quiet way Lily said, I can't show you. She turned the key, and the bus engine hummed to life. As she sat there, she thought about all the children who climbed those steps every day. The ones who talked too much. The ones who stayed quiet. The ones who tried to hide what was really happening at home. That week, the story spread around town. Parents talked in whispers at the grocery store. Kids shared bits and pieces of what they'd heard on the playground. But Mrs. Collins didn't tell anyone the details. She didn't want gossip. She just wanted Lily to have peace. A few days later, she got a call from the social worker asking if she would be willing to visit Lily. She agreed immediately. When she arrived at the small apartment where Lily was staying with her aunt, the little girl looked shy but smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. Hi, Mrs. Collins said softly. How are you holding up? Lily shrugged. Better, I guess. Her aunt smiled from the kitchen. She's been resting a lot. The police and counselors have been very kind. Mrs. Collins sat beside Lily on the couch. You know, I've been thinking about you a lot, she said. You were really brave, you know that? Lily looked down at her hands. I didn't feel brave. I was just scared. Mrs. Collins nodded. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are. For a moment, they sat quietly. Then Lily asked, Can I still ride the bus again someday? Mrs. Collins smiled. Of course you can. Whenever you're ready, your seat will be waiting. Lily smiled faintly. Okay. As Mrs. Collins left that day, she felt lighter. The fear that had hung over her for days was starting to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of relief. That evening, as she drove home, she passed the familiar streets where she'd picked Lily up every morning. The house looked empty now. No one waiting by the curb, no little backpack in sight. She slowed down a bit, watching the quiet front yard, and whispered to herself, You're safe now, sweetheart. In the following weeks, Mrs. Collins couldn't help but notice how differently she looked at her students. Every child who climbed onto her bus became more than just a name on her roster. She noticed the tiny details, the slumped shoulders, the forced smiles, the kids who said, I'm fine, when they clearly weren't. One afternoon, a boy climbed on the bus looking upset. He had forgotten his lunch and was trying not to cry. Mrs. Collins reached into her bag, pulled out a granola bar and handed it to him. Here, take this for now. You can bring me one tomorrow, she said. He grinned and nodded. Thanks. As he ran to his seat, Mrs. Collins smiled to herself. It was such a small thing. But she knew now that small things mattered. Sometimes it wasn't the big heroic acts that made the difference. It was the quiet moments when someone cared enough to see. She thought about Lily often. The social worker sent her a letter later that month saying that Lily was doing well. She was adjusting to her new school, making friends again and starting to smile more. Mrs. Collins folded the letter carefully and kept it in her drawer at home. Whenever she felt tired or frustrated, she'd take it out and read it again. It reminded her why she did what she did. One evening, as she parked the bus for the last route of the day, she caught a glimpse of the setting sun through the windshield, the same soft orange glow that had filled the sky the day she found the courage to stop the bus. She smiled quietly to herself, her heart full of mixed emotions. Life had gone back to normal, but she knew she'd never forget what had happened. Not the fear, not the tears, but also not the strength she had found in that moment. Sometimes, she thought, doing the right thing doesn't come with fanfare or applause. Sometimes it's just a quiet voice inside you that says, pay attention. And when you do, it can change someone's life forever. Weeks turned into months, and life on the bus slowly went back to normal. The kids laughed again. Music played softly through the small speakers, and Mrs. Collins found herself smiling more often. But even with the noise and chatter, she never forgot the quiet space that used to belong to Lily. Every time she looked at that seat near the middle of the bus, the one where Lily always sat, Clutching her bag, she felt a soft ache in her heart. One sunny morning, Mrs. Collins parked the bus by the usual stop and looked out at the line of kids waiting with their parents. Some were half awake, others bouncing with energy, waving their arms and shouting good mornings. She loved this part of her job. The energy, the innocence, the sense of routine that grounded her day. But she also saw things differently now. Each child carried a story, and sometimes, what was happening at home didn't show until you looked a little closer. Later that day, while the kids were at school, she stopped by the teacher's lounge to drop off some forms. The counselor who had worked with Lily happened to be there, pouring herself a cup of coffee. When she saw Mrs. Collins, her face lit up. "Oh, I was hoping I'd run into you," the counselor said warmly. "I've been meaning to tell you. Lily's doing really well." Mrs. Collins's eyes brightened. "Really? How's she been?" "She's living with her aunt permanently now," the counselor said with a gentle smile. "It took some time, but she's adjusting. She's at a new school and her teachers say she's opening up, making friends, even joining the art club." Mrs. Collins let out a long breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "That's wonderful news. I was so worried about her." "I know," the counselor said. "And honestly, I think you played a big part in that. If you hadn't trusted your instincts, things could have turned out very differently." Mrs. Collins smiled softly. "I just did what anyone would do." The counselor tilted her head. "Not everyone does. You cared enough to see something others might have missed. That made all the difference." On her way home that evening, Mrs. Collins felt something warm in her chest, a kind of quiet pride. Not the loud kind that came from recognition, but the kind that settled deep inside when you knew you had done something meaningful. The road stretched ahead, golden under the fading sunlight. The same route she drove every day now felt different, full of hidden stories, quiet strength, and small moments that mattered more than anyone realized. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. As Mrs. Collins was finishing her morning route, she noticed a familiar figure waiting at one of the stops she didn't usually visit anymore. It was Lily, standing beside her aunt, holding a small lunchbox and wearing a new backpack. Her hair was neatly tied back and she was smiling, really smiling this time. Mrs. Collins pulled the bus over, her heart jumping. She opened the doors and Lily stepped inside. "Hi," Lily said shyly. "I just wanted to say hello." Mrs. Collins couldn't stop smiling. "Well, hello there. You look wonderful. How are you doing?" "I'm good," Lily said softly. "My new school is nice. I'm in art club now. I paint a lot." "That's great, sweetheart. I'm so happy to hear that." Lily looked down at her shoes, then back up. "I made something for you." She reached into her small bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. When Mrs. Collins opened it, she saw a drawing of a yellow school bus driving under a bright blue sky. Inside the windows were small faces of happy kids, and right up front, behind the wheel, was a woman with kind eyes and a big smile. At the bottom of the page, Lily had written, "Thank you for seeing me." Mrs. Collins's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Lily, her voice catching. "This is beautiful." "Thank you so much," Lily shrugged, smiling shyly. "You helped me." "I just wanted to say that." Mrs. Collins reached out and gently squeezed her hand. "You helped yourself too, Lily. You were brave." The bus was quiet for a moment, and then Lily's aunt stepped forward, her voice soft. "We wanted to stop by before heading to her new school. She insisted on coming to see you." Mrs. Collins smiled at both of them. "I'm glad you did. This means the world to me." After a few more words and a quick hug, Lily waved goodbye and stepped off the bus. As they walked away, Mrs. Collins watched them through the mirror until they disappeared around the corner. The drawing sat on her lap, the colors bright and full of life. She decided right then that she would frame it and hang it on the wall near her kitchen table. That evening, she did just that. Every morning after, as she sipped her coffee before work, she looked at that picture and smiled. It reminded her that even ordinary people, a school bus driver, a teacher, a kind neighbor, could change someone's life in small but powerful ways. Months passed, and the school year rolled on. The cold mornings turned warm again, and soon it was spring. The flowers along the sidewalks began to bloom, and the bus windows were cracked open to let in the soft breeze. The laughter on the bus seemed a little brighter now, a little freer. Mrs. Collins noticed it, and she realized she had changed too. She was more patient, more understanding, and she never brushed off a child's silence as just a bad day. One afternoon, as she parked the bus after her route, one of the younger kids, a cheerful boy named Kevin, ran up to her and handed her a small note before hopping off. She smiled and opened it. It said, "Thanks for always being nice. You make my mornings better." She laughed softly and tucked the note into her pocket. Another little reminder that kindness mattered more than people thought. That night, sitting in her cozy living room, Mrs. Collins thought about how life could surprise you. Sometimes one unexpected day could shift everything. She thought about how she used to just drive the bus, following the same route every day, never really thinking about the stories behind each stop. Now she saw those stops differently, as doorways into hundreds of little worlds, each filled with its own joys, struggles, and dreams. She remembered the first time she saw Lily act strangely. How easy it would have been to ignore it. A quiet child, a tired morning, a busy schedule, and all simple excuses. But something inside her refused to look away. That tiny moment of awareness, that feeling that something isn't right, had saved a little girl from something far worse. And as she sat there, sipping tea and looking at the framed drawing on her wall, she realized that the story wasn't really about what happened on that bus. It was about noticing people, listening, paying attention. Because sometimes the most important cries for help aren't loud. They're silent. They hide behind forced smiles and quiet eyes. A few years later, long after Lily had moved to another town, Mrs. Collins received a letter. The handwriting was neat but slightly uneven, a mix of childhood and maturity. She opened it carefully. It read, "Dear Mrs. Collins, I don't know if you remember me, but I'm sure you do. It's Lily. I'm 13 now. I'm doing really well. My aunt says I've grown up a lot, and I think she's right. I still love art, and I'm helping paint a mural at my new school. I wanted to tell you that I still think about you sometimes. You were the first person who saw that something was wrong, even when I didn't say anything. You didn't ignore me, and that changed everything. I hope you know how much that means. Thank you for caring. Love, Lily." Mrs. Collins read the letter twice, her eyes wet with tears. She smiled through them, holding the paper to her heart. She felt a deep sense of peace. Not the loud kind that came from being recognized or rewarded. Just a quiet, deep gratitude for the life she had chosen, for the moments she hadn't overlooked, for the people she had touched without even realizing it. When she went to bed that night, she left the letter on her nightstand. The next morning, she woke up early, brewed her coffee, and looked once more at Lily's drawing hanging on her wall. The sunlight caught the colors just right. The yellow bus glowing warmly under a blue sky. The driver's smile bright and steady. She whispered softly to herself, "You're okay now." And maybe that was enough, to know that one small act of care, one moment of listening, could ripple through someone's life in ways you'd never expect. To know that even the smallest kindness could be a turning point for someone who needed it most. Mrs. Collins climbed into her bus, started the engine, and watched as the first group of children ran toward her, laughing and waving. The doors hissed open, and the sound of their chatter filled the air. It was just another school day, ordinary, familiar, full of noise, but to her it was also something more. It was a reminder that every morning brought new chances to see someone, to help someone, to make a difference, and so she smiled, adjusted the rearview mirror, and drove off into the rising sun, ready for whatever stories awaited her next.